Deep in the sprawling coniferous forests of the Pacific Northwest stood Blackwood Pines cabin. It wasn't ancient or grand, just a simple, rustic log cabin built in the 1970s by an eccentric naturalist named Silas Thorne, who had later vanished under mysterious circumstances. For estranged couple, Mark and Linda, it was a last-ditch effort, a week of forced togetherness, isolated from the distractions and stresses of city life, to see if their failing marriage could be salvaged. Their therapist had called it focused reconnection. Linda had privately called it 7 days of awkward silence in a creepy wooden box. The cabin was remote, accessible only by a long, unpaved logging road. No cell service, no internet, just the towering pines, the whispering wind, and the unsettling quiet of the deep woods. The interior was basic: a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, 2 cramped bedrooms, and a single large picture window in the living area that looked out onto the dense, unyielding forest. From their first night, Linda felt an unnerving sensation of being watched, not from within the cabin, but from outside, from the impenetrable darkness of the trees beyond the picture window. She'd catch fleeting movements in her peripheral vision, shadows that seemed to detach themselves from the trees and then melt back in. Mark, preoccupied with their marital woes and determined to remain optimistic, dismissed her concerns as city nerves. "It's just the woods, Linda. Animals, probably. Deer, raccoons." But Linda knew it wasn't animals. The feeling was too specific, too focused. It was as if someone or something was standing just out of sight, observing them through that large exposed window. She started drawing the curtains as soon as dusk fell, much to Mark's annoyance. "We're here to enjoy nature, not hide from it," he'd argue. The strange occurrences began subtly. Objects near the window would be slightly disturbed overnight. A book left on the windowsill found on the floor. A coffee mug shifted. They'd hear soft scratching sounds against the exterior walls, particularly around the window, often accompanied by a low, guttural breathing sound that Mark tried to convince himself was the wind. One afternoon, while Mark was out attempting to fish in a nearby stream, Linda was tidying the living area. She glanced at the picture window, and her blood ran cold. Pressed against the glass from the outside was a large, muddy handprint, its fingers unnaturally long and slender. It was too high up to be a child's, and too large for an average adult. She scrubbed it off frantically, her heart pounding, but the image of it remained seared in her mind. She didn't tell Mark, fearing his dismissal, or worse, his insistence on investigating, which terrified her even more. Their attempts at reconnection were failing miserably, the silence between them thick with unspoken resentments, and now, for Linda, a growing insidious fear. The Watcher, as Linda began to call it in her mind, grew bolder. One evening, as they sat in strained silence before the fire, the curtains still open, as Mark had insisted, Linda saw it clearly. For a split second, a tall, gaunt figure standing at the edge of the woods, partially obscured by a large pine. Its features were indistinct in the dim light, but she could make out pale, glowing eyes fixed intently on the cabin, on her. She gasped, pointing, but by the time Mark looked, it was gone. "Linda, there's nothing there," he said, his voice laced with exasperation. "You're letting this place get to you." "It was there, Mark. I saw it," she insisted, her voice rising with hysteria. "It's watching us." Their argument escalated, dredging up old hurts, the cabin's oppressive atmosphere amplifying their anger and frustration. It was exactly the opposite of what the therapist had intended. That night, Linda couldn't sleep. She lay rigid in her bed, listening to the sounds of the forest, every creak of the cabin, every rustle of leaves, magnified by her fear. Around 3 a.m. she heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping on the picture window. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, deliberate, patient. She crept out of bed, her body trembling. Mark was fast asleep, oblivious. She peeked through the gap in the curtains in the living room. In the pale moonlight, she saw a face pressed against the glass. It was grotesque, elongated, with sunken, glowing eyes and a lipless, leering grin that revealed rows of needle-sharp teeth. Its skin was the color of wet earth. It was the Watcher. Linda stifled a scream, stumbling backward, her hand flying to her mouth. The thing at the window didn't move, its terrifying gaze fixed on her. It raised a long, claw-like finger and tapped again, harder this time, the sound echoing through the silent cabin. She finally found her voice, a choked cry. "Mark, wake up! It's at the window!" Mark jolted awake, confused and disoriented. He rushed into the living room just as Linda, in a surge of desperate courage, yanked the curtains fully open. The window was empty. The forest outside was dark and still. "Linda, for God's sake!" Mark exploded, his fear now replaced by anger. "There's nothing there. You're having nightmares. You're losing it." "It was there," Linda sobbed, collapsing onto the sofa. "It was horrible. We have to leave, Mark, now." Mark, though shaken by her genuine terror, was still trying to cling to rationality. "We can't just leave in the middle of the night. The road is treacherous. We'll go in the morning, okay?" First thing, they spent the rest of the night huddled together in the living room, neither of them sleeping, jumping at every sound. As dawn approached, casting a grey, feeble light through the dreaded window, they began to pack frantically. As Linda was stuffing clothes into a bag in their bedroom, she noticed a small, crudely made doll lying on her pillow. It was fashioned from twigs, moss, and strands of what looked like dark animal hair, bound together with sinew. Its eyes were two small, shiny black stones. It hadn't been there before. She let out a small, choked cry. This was a marker, a token. They found Silas Thorne's journals hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the kitchen while searching for the car keys Mark had misplaced. Thorne's early entries were filled with wonder at the forest's beauty, detailed observations of flora and fauna. But as the entries progressed, a darker tone emerged. He wrote of feeling watched, of unsettling encounters with a forest guardian, a thing of shadows and whispers. He described finding strange symbols carved into trees, small disturbing effigies left on his doorstep. His final entries were disjointed, filled with paranoia and fear, speaking of the eyes in the dark and the hunger that never sleeps. The last entry simply read, "It knows my name. It wants in." A cold dread settled over Mark and Linda. Silas Thorne hadn't just vanished. He'd been taken or driven mad by the same entity that was now tormenting them. They found the car keys and practically ran from the cabin, not looking back. The drive down the logging road was a blur of terror, every shadow seeming to hold a lurking figure, every rustle of leaves sounding like pursuit. They didn't stop until they reached the main highway and saw the reassuring sight of other cars, other people. They never spoke of what happened at Blackwood Pines cabin to anyone, not even their therapist. The experience, terrifying as it was, had an unexpected side effect. It had bonded them. Facing a shared, inexplicable horror had stripped away their petty grievances, reminding them of their reliance on each other. Their marriage, against all odds, began to heal. They never found out what the Watcher in the window was. A local legend, a creature of the deep woods, or perhaps a manifestation of the forest's ancient, primal energy, resentful of intrusion. All they knew was that it was real, it was malevolent, and it was still out there in the dark heart of Blackwood Pines, waiting, watching from the trees, perhaps for the next unsuspecting visitors to its domain. And sometimes, late at night, Linda would wake up with a start, convinced she could see pale, glowing eyes staring at her from the darkness outside her suburban bedroom window.